I talk a lot on here about the 40-year plus bipartisan political project to convince the American public, working people in particular, that the government is not capable of serving their interests, distracting them with bedtime stories about the American dream and personal responsibility and Castro's bad and we don't want to be Venezuela and all about having the mortal fortitude to be able to push on even in the worst of times. And this as wages have stagnated since 1973 as costs of labor and productivity have gone up, and labor market discrimination has gone up as well. So as the world has fallen down around them, the government, around the public, the American public, the vast majority, the government has basically turned their backs on them by spinning them these little fairy tales of how anything is possible and just don't count on your government for help, etc. And I just recently covered how uh, the accelerated problems inherent in the American capitalist, hyper capitalist system of austerity for the poor and socialism for the rich, how that has basically vastly expedited the changes, the shifts in the culture around the notion of government being able to expand and expand its utility for people by what we saw in the form of direct payments and enhanced unemployment insurance benefits during the passage of the CARES Act last March. This had such profound material, concrete impact on people's lives. It actually lifted people up out of poverty, which is something I don't think we've ever seen before in modern American history. This is something Jeff Stein, who covers national economic policy for the Washington Post, recently noted on an appearance on Rising with Crystal Ball that I just talked about in a previous post. And that is the way the politics around the pandemic, that is the mass levels of starvation. I've talked about 26 million people are going hungry. That's 1 in 8 Americans, as many as three to four times as many Americans as were going hungry before the pandemic. I talk about 12 million people have fallen $5,000, $6,000, $8,000 behind on their rent. 8 million Americans have fallen into poverty for the first time ever since the summer. 15 million Americans have lost their employer-based health insurance. Theft is spiking for essentials, small petty theft for essentials, not luxury theft like TVs and shit like that. I'm talking about baby formula, diapers, talking about food, pasta, ziti. So you put all that together, and the conversation surrounding policy to get out another round of stimulus checks in the form of $2,000 enhanced benefits, $2,000 direct payments for Americans, $4,000 for couples, 6,000 plus for family of four, right? This has basically uh, taken hold of the American culture and basically put to bed very, very quickly the cultural politics surrounding economic policy in this country. People are less interested in hearing that their government can't work for them nowadays. In fact, 80% of Americans, 80% of Americans, is totally bipartisan, support $2,000 direct payment relief for Americans in the form of another round of checks. So that brings us to the latest on the negotiations in the Senate. So now House already has passed $2,000 with the support of 41 Republicans, something like 2/3 of the House. This was an overwhelming vote, agreed already to pass a standalone bill uh, regarding direct checks and for $2,000 for Americans. And now all eyes are on the Senate. The current Senate session is set to expire at midnight on Sunday, so time is running on the clock, and Mitch McConnell wants what Republicans and Democrats in Washington always want, which is what do they always want, right? It's bloated military spending, right? It's always about unlimited resources for the military, tax cuts, and deregulation for the wealthy and the corporations. Those are basically the priorities that drive the politics of Washington. So what Mitch McConnell wants is that military bill, and it's something that Senator Bernie Sanders, has basically uh, held, has basically dangled. Bernie has taken hostage the top priority. It's the bipartisan priority of Senate Republicans, including Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, by threatening that the annual National Defense Authorization Act, which is not a spending bill. I incorrectly reported on a previous video that this was the spending bill that was needed in order to keep the government funded into next year. That's incorrect. This is just a run-of-the-bill, bloated military spending bill that has some good stuff in it. That has raises the salaries of our veterans deployed overseas, but basically the majority of which favors uh, spending on weaponry and military equipment, and we all know that's money that goes into the pockets of the board of directors over at Raytheon. So this is military training, new weapon systems, pay increases for soldiers. Uh, I'm for that. That's a good thing, but also the other stuff. So it's a $740 billion, a record $740 billion annual spending bill for the military. It's not even necessary to keep the government open. So it's not like the stakes are that high if this doesn't pass. It would complicate things, but it wouldn't pass. And remember that the must pass spending bill already included something like 730 billion in amenities for the military spending. So it's not like the military haven't already been taken care of. In addition to the $740 billion increase in military spending over the next 10 years that was passed under the first year of the Trump administration, something like $70 billion a year, increase in military spending. So military are good. Like, now what are we doing for the American people? So for the first time ever, the Democrats, namely behind Bernie Sanders, are actually fighting. I always talk about how the Democrats generally play the part of, they're basically the jobbers. If you guys watch pro wrestling, the jobbers are the wrestler that got paid to lose. So the Democrats always, when it comes to negotiations with Mitch McConnell, always get their asses handed to them. And Bernie Sanders is not falling for it. So Bernie Sanders is actually now, before the clock runs out, denying the Senate unanimous consent, which is, the Senate operates under the principles of unanimous consent, which means that any one senator can effectively complicate all procedural business by denying consent, by denying his vote, his participation. And so obviously the new year, we just had a holiday, so Bernie Sanders threatened that he was going to keep Mitch McConnell and the Senate in Washington for work, and that they were not going to be able to get their precious National Defense Authorizations Act passed unless there was an agreement on holding a standalone up or down vote on this question of $2,000 direct payments. It'll either pass or it won't. We don't know that. In fact, Republicans likely don't even have enough votes for it to pass. But what we do know is that we need a vote on this, because this is survival checks. This is a time when Americans desperately need the money. And this is the single priority. Now, I've talked about how Donald Trump has done some sort of kabuki theater in favor of the $2,000 checks. It's basically him sort of virtue signaling, because he was basically absent during the negotiations because he was too busy trying to rig the election, crying about his allegations of widespread voter fraud and why he should be president, etc. So Donald Trump didn't actually participate in the negotiations, even though he claims to care about the $2,000. He just sort of gave like a half-assed 4-minute speech in the Oval Office in favor of, and has applied pressure on Mitch McConnell. Now, to his credit for coming out in favor of pressuring Republicans to get $2,000 checks, that's a good thing. But is it coming from an honest place? No, and it was done very lazy and sloppily, and he still signed the relief bill anyway, partly because he's incompetent and a moron, which I talked about in a previous post, but also probably partly because his heart's just not that into it. I think he's just trying to settle a personal score. He's pissed off at Mitch McConnell for rightfully recognizing that Joe Biden is going to be the next president, and Donald Trump is having a tantrum over that. But Bernie Sanders is actually wielding power. So now the question is, was Bernie Sanders going to be able to block? Were the Democrats, led by Bernie Sanders, going to be able to block the Senate business from getting to a vote on the military bill, which Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell very much wants? Without Was he going to be able to allow that without getting Mitch McConnell to also agree to holding a vote on $2,000, which was basically what Bernie did, was manage to couple the two things together. And so what we found out is that on Wednesday, Democrats caved. Very unfortunately, there was Sanders forced Mitch McConnell to call for a procedural motion. This is going to get a little wonky. I apologize. This is a little technocratic. This is sort of explaining the particulars of the quirky ins and outs of the way senatorial legislation works. But basically what happens is Sanders' move, I'm reading David Sirota's piece on this over at Jacobin. But basically what happens was, according to Sirota, Sanders' move, by threatening to couple the two things together, forced McConnell to ask the Senate to pass a formal motion to proceed on the defense bill, which would let Republicans move forward on the Pentagon priority without a vote on the $2,000 checks. So the motion, what that did in effect was create the opportunity, create that opening for Democrats to block Mitch McConnell from being able to vote on his priority, the military spending bill, without bringing up Bernie and the Democrats' priority and the priority of the American public, right? 80% of Americans support $2,000 checks. So without being able to vote on $2,000 checks, which is what should be Mitch's priority. So Sanders forced McConnell to ask the Senate basically for permission in the form of a formal motion to just separate those two, decouple those two things so that we could just get the military. And basically, overwhelmingly, the Democrats caved, as they always do. They play, as Sirota mentions here, the Washington Generals to the Republicans, Globetrotters, to Mitch McConnell, the Republicans, Globetrotters. And 41 Democrats obediently voted with McConnell, allowing him to move on the defense bill forward without a vote on the checks. That included yes votes from Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, the lead sponsor on a bill to give Americans monthly $2,000 checks during the pandemic. So I've talked about this before. Kamala Harris was named the vice president. She co-led, she was a co-lead sponsor on a $2,000 a month bill that ever since she became vice president, she's just sort of conveniently forgotten about. But what's really embarrassing here is that just a day before Kamala Harris voted to effectively surrender her leverage, along with 40 other Democrats, to surrender her leverage to McConnell to be able to move his priority to a vote without the priority of the American public, of people who are going hungry. Just a day before, Harris had called on Mitch McConnell to vote on that legislation, that $2,000 a month bill from back in, I believe, July or August, that she was pushing at the time before she was tapped for VP. So how embarrassing, right? So Kamala Harris, who's a Democrat, right? So Democrats are supposed to be the party of the working people, and she's the incoming vice president. So if anything, you would think that her and Biden would have been the strongest advocates of playing hardball with McConnell and taking hostage his precious military bills, military spending priorities, in favor of getting relief passed for Americans. In fact, instead, she made some noise, some virtue signaling about how McConnell should hold her legislation for a bill, and then the very next day agreed to, let's just separate these two things. So you're not married. You can work on one without attending to the other one, and that's backwards when the priorities of the Americans should be the other way around. Americans don't care about this military spending bill. Americans care about the $2,000 check. 80% of Americans, like I said, this is a no-brainer. This should be completely non-controversial, especially if you're a Democrat. Very unfortunately, we got 41 Democrats voted in favor. There were 6 Democratic holdouts. Elizabeth Warren, Chris Van Hollen, Jeff Merkley, Ed Markey, and Ron Wyden voted along with Bernie Sanders. But you know, missed opportunity, guys. I mean, what do you have to lose? What do you have to? This is not even, again, this is not a must-pass bill. The government is not going to shut down. You know, there's no brinksmanship at play here. It's not end of the world. You know, yes, the Congress is set to expire at midnight on Sunday, but the government is going to, you know, this is not like you're going to force the government to the brink. So you're under pressure. You have a timeline, but it's not, you know, it's not like, it's not the end of the world by any stretch. So this wasn't even a must-pass bill. And we all know that the moment that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden take office, again, once the Republicans lose that pressure from the top, from the president, from Donald Trump, the most popular Republican in the country, once they lose that pressure from him on Twitter, you know that the conversation is immediately going to shift to austerity and to the debt and the deficit. That's the one thing Republicans do better than ever. Whenever there's a Democratic administration, previously Bill Clinton, Obama, the Overton window, the political discourse from our elected leaders in Washington always boils down to, well, what are we doing about the debt and the deficit? We got to get serious. Let's be fiscally responsible. Even though we know they're all full of it, there's a double standard. They don't care about bloated military spending. In fact, under W. Bush, they got into two wars while they cut taxes for the rich. So at the end of the day, their priority is really coddling their donors. So they're all full of shit. And Donald Trump too. Look, spending went up under Trump's administration, but let's keep it real. He gave the rich a $1.5 trillion tax cut just because. And the military expanded their budget by what, 730 billion dollars over 10 years, his first year in office. And for what? I mean, did they need that? What did he do for Social Security or Medicare? No. Trump was trying to cut Social Security and Medicare as recently as 2019, if I'm not mistaken. So look, they're all full of shit, the Republicans. And now that Biden and Kamala, who we now know don't have our backs, because Kamala just voted to surrender the Democrats' leverage in negotiations with McConnell to allow him to get his vote through without even prioritizing the $2,000 check. So epic fail by Kamala Harris. And I mentioned previously that Joe Biden, he was working behind the scenes during the latest COVID relief bill that Trump just signed, because Trump's a loser and a moron who got taken advantage of by Lindsey Graham. But Biden was behind the scenes during those negotiations, pushing those corporate hacky Democrats to go with their gut when it comes to austerity, and forget the 1200 talk. That's what Bernie Sanders and Josh Hawley, those radical populists in the Senate, that's all. I understand that's cute about $1,200. Forget that. Let's go down with 600. Let's get it done. We all know that I'm a deal maker, and I'm gonna be a deal maker, and I would never embarrass the Republicans in triangulation and austerity and all that. That's who Joe Biden is, and who he's been. His track record as a senator for the last 40 years, right? We got footage all over YouTube of Joe Biden calling for cuts to Social Security and Medicare from the floor of the Senate that dates back decades. So Joe Biden and Kamala, they are not the answer to our prayers. And this is just further proof of that from Kamala's side. But I also want to note something something that David Sirota has noted here, and that is with regards to the culture. You know, I've mentioned in a previous post about the whether or not this debate of whether politics flows downstream from the culture, or whether the culture flows downstream from the politics. And Jeff Stein recently made some very interesting comments on this over on Rising in his unique role as someone who covers economic politics for a living. And he noted the shift in the culture. And I think it's true. I think the conversation around $2,000 checks, especially with the support from a Republican president, is going to meaningfully evolve the Overton window on this issue of the welfare state and uh, and our economic priorities in the long term. But I want to note the pressure that came down against $2,000 payments from establishment media outlets, from the mainstream media. So notably the New York Times. David Sirota notes in his Jacobin article, the New York Times, Paul Krugman and Tom Friedman, they were arguing that the wildly popular initiative of $2,000 checks was divisive and that the economics aren't very good. Tom Friedman, who married into a real estate empire, called the idea crazy and fretted that checks might go to people who don't need the help. So You had the Washington Post, who is Jacobin, who, as Sirota notes, is owned by the world's richest man, Jeff Bezos. They argue the $2,000 checks would be unjust because it would benefit some rich people, while in theory, uh, so um, so yeah, so the Washington Post, which by the way, recently when we were talking about $600, they were decrying the rising poverty in the country and the rising starvation. So it was a problem when we were talking about 600, and now suddenly, now that we're talking about $2,000, oh, what are you talking about? No, we're on the mend. Are you kidding me? The economy is doing much better. Of course, we don't need $2,000. What are we? Let's get real, man. Let's come on. By the way, it is targeted, so it's not like, you know what I mean. It's, first of all, I'm in favor of universal programs, because if there's a universal programs, there's going to be less social tension, less animosity between groups, the haves and the have-nots, as to who's getting this and who's not, who's benefiting. So universality programs like social security, for example, extremely popular because everyone benefits. So if you're talking about targeting, you're getting off on the wrong foot to begin with. That is the wrong way to argue for a policy, to push for a policy. But over here, they're arguing that no, even this targeted thing is not targeted enough. That this is going to, and they're pretending it's because they don't want to help rich people. When basically these are all rich people. So it's like, it's like as though, so who else was commenting here? Larry Summers, former President Obama National Security Council, as well as President Clinton's Treasury Secretary. He's on the record saying there's no good economic argument for universal $2,000 checks at this moment. So the reason why this is significant is because the culture, the culture that sort of promotes that bipartisan, pro-corporate, for pro-socialism for the rich, pro-austerity for the working class, is sort of giving political cover to Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is actually citing these publications. David Sirota notes that McConnell said, even the liberal Washington Post today is laughing at the political left, demanding more huge giveaways with no relationship to actual need. So this is basically something where we're trying to shift the culture so that outlets, Bloomberg News, of course, weighed in. Bloomberg had their own House editorial demanding Congress block the checks. So of course, Bloomberg, owned by one of the richest men in the country, obviously. So we all know. So the Washington Post, we all know, MSNBC, CNN, again, they're all hacks. They want to, $2,000 is not good because it would benefit the rich too much, right? It's as though, first of all, even if that was the case, you just tax it on the back end. That doesn't matter. But it's it's about that this actually, again, this shifts people's consciousness. This shifts people's perception. It is a uniquely American phenomenon, especially relative to the rest of the Western world, that the government is incapable. This is a bipartisan political project coming down from our presidents and our elected leaders in Washington for the last 40 years, that the government is not capable of serving your interests. We have personal responsibility. We have an American dream to sell you suckers in the working class, you people who work 40, 50, 60 hours a week, as your wages have gone down and your hours have gone up since 1973 and your cost of living have gone up. We have peanuts for you, but if you pull yourself up by the bootstraps and you have and you're morally tough enough, someday maybe you can live vicariously through us. Or so it's all nonsense. And this is what bothers me about Kamala Harris, is that we're supposed to be excited about her. She's this media creation. We're expected to, because she looks like us, because she looks like minorities, we're supposed to just take it for granted that she's going to be our champion, and that's not what her record indicates. That's just not, but no, she's a woman of color, so look at that, this is a first. And if you try hard enough, you could live vicariously through her and the Obamas. That's what Kamala Harris is. Kamala Harris is basically a cynical weapon deployed by all these, by the culture, by the media and the political establishment in Washington and in New York to basically keep the pitchforks at bay. It's all about woke identity politics, and nothing. Kamala Harris, nothing to say since August, since she becomes vice president, about $2,000 checks. And now that Americans are demanding it, 80% of Americans, bipartisan consensus, totally non controversial. Kamala's got nothing to say and is now giving McConnell all the leverage in the world that he wants, surrendering all her leverage right before she takes office. So how do you think that relationship is going to work out if Mitch McConnell keeps control of the Senate and we have Kamala and Biden at the top of at the top of at the highest levels of power? You think those two aren't going to work together to get some austerity to get some bad deals done for the working class? Austerity. You already know it's so Democrats sold us out, man. They gave McConnell what he wanted, and Chuck Schumer and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are all complicit.